And get started. Welcome, everyone. This is our fourth class, I believe, in this second part of our course on Lama Tsongkhapa's middle length Lamrim. So let me go ahead and pull up the prayers for tonight. Let's see if I can find where I have that in my files here. There it is. Okay, good. All right, so we'll start with just this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once. Well, actually, I might mention a little bit about this praise. This sort of contains all of these amazing qualities of the Buddha. We're on the subject of refuge. And so as we recite this, we can think about how all of these qualities make the Buddha a perfect refuge. And then, of course, as we're going to see tonight, because the Buddha is a perfect refuge, the Dharma that he taught and that was responsible for him attaining that state is also a perfect refuge. And then the Sangha who practice these teachings and who have developed deeper realizations than ourselves are also a perfect refuge. So we can bring those thoughts to mind, but then also think about the fact that what the Buddha has achieved, every one of us can achieve. We can attain this exact same state. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do a short mandala offering in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami. And refuge in bodhicitta, first time in English, twice chanting the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodong soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonam gi. Drola penchir sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodong soki choknam la. Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi. Daki chunyen gipe sanam gi. Drola penchir sangye drupar shog. All right, let's do a short meditation where we'll first calm the mind using the breath. So use whatever technique you prefer. And then we'll spend a little bit of time reflecting on this idea of refuge and kind of generating our motivation in line with the 2 causes of refuge that we looked at in last week's class. And then we'll conclude and start our class. So begin with some minutes of silent meditation on the breath. And now let's set our motivation for tonight. And recall that in the previous course, we looked at the conditions we have currently that are so amazing, so wonderful, so precious. This human existence that is rich with opportunity. And we've met with the Dharma through the kindness of our teachers, our spiritual guides. We have these perfect conditions right now. But as we've seen already in this course, the first thing we need to be mindful of is that this is not going to last forever. Moreover, it's uncertain when it will end. This life can come to an end at any time. And suddenly this amazing opportunity is over like a flash of lightning. Comes and then quickly goes. And if we have not used this life well, there's a good chance that we'll end up in an unfortunate rebirth. We've looked at the suffering of the lower rebirths to instill some level of wholesome fear, some trepidation at the fact that we could end up in such an unfortunate state. Not only experience unbelievable suffering in those existences, but moreover be blocked from continuing to practice a spiritual path, not having the opportunity we have in this human life. So that helps us to arrive at this determination to use this life to at least gain a good rebirth. And with the fear of the lower rebirths in our mind, we generate the thought of refuge that is rooted in that fear, that apprehension, but also is combined with some assurance in our own hearts, some confidence that the three jewels are what will protect us from that fear. The sense of refuge primarily will lead us to taking refuge in the teachings of the Buddha, specifically the teachings of karma. What will help us to have control over our rebirths, to stop creating the causes for the lower rebirths and create the causes for good, fortunate opportunities in the future. And this is the first level of our motivation. We can combine that motivation with some sense of refuge, some confidence that the Buddhist path that we have found will lead us to attaining that result, at least this result of high status, a good rebirth. And as we'll see later in this part of the course, that is not a final solution. We continue to get good rebirths. Yes, we will have better opportunities within samsara, the cycle of existence, but we'll still be trapped. We won't know or taste true freedom, nirvana, peace. So we generate an even deeper, more ultimate motivation of attaining our own liberation, attaining freedom from these factors, karma and delusions that are keeping us bound, going from life to life, and attaining that liberation, our own self-liberation, that will be a state that's unparalleled in terms of what we have experienced to this day. Nothing would match it. A peaceful state of nirvana that would be the end of all of our suffering. But having that motivation is not enough because countless other beings are in the same predicament as ourselves. We were to attain self-liberation. We'd be leaving behind all these amazing beings who have been so kind to us, lifetime after lifetime. They've been our dear mothers, our dear fathers. They've helped us in so many ways to have happiness, to practice Dharma. We need those beings, and we need to be concerned about those beings. So we generate the mind that aspires to go beyond our own liberation, to attain complete Buddhahood, a state of enlightenment where we will then be able to skillfully, perfectly, spontaneously help all beings to attain enlightenment, to become a refuge for them. to be a perfect refuge that can help them to develop their minds to attaining that same state. So set this motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, very firmly in your heart, combined with that genuine sense of refuge that knows that this is the way to accomplish that. This is the way for ourselves and all beings to find exactly what we seek, true happiness and complete freedom from all suffering, all obscuration, all dissatisfaction. And then you can open your eyes fully and come into the space, and we'll start our class for tonight. Can everybody still hear me okay? Is it all working fine? Okay, great. All right, let's go ahead and just get grounded in where we were at. As I think it was pretty well done in the meditation, but essentially we just began to touch on this topic of refuge in the last class. It's motivated, again, the setup is the first two topics of what we often call the small scope, or the teachings of the least capacity. The fact that death will come, and it's not certain when it will come. And at the time of death, what's most important is what we've done with our minds, our spiritual practice. And if that isn't the case, then of course we could end up in a lower rebirth. If we haven't really done our work in this life, chances are that karma will take over and propel us into an unfortunate existence. And we looked at the three states that are within the lower rebirths of animals, hungry ghosts, hell beings. And again, that's to develop some level of fear. But as I called it in the motivation tonight, wholesome fear, not neurotic fear where we, can't do anything, but rather this fear that impels us to do something really meaningful with this life, to devote ourselves to following the teachings of the Buddha by gaining some confidence that the Buddha can help us to address this dilemma that we're in, and that we've been in since beginningless time. We've just never, kind of followed a safe refuge, a safe direction in terms of these three jewels to the degree that we need to. No doubt we've all met with the Dharma before in other lifetimes, but something did not quite happen enough so that we have not yet attained these deeper states of liberation, enlightenment. So we have to, again, begin by turning our mind towards the three jewels and beginning to investigate what makes them reliable objects of refuge. And this is where we're going to start tonight. So last week, we went through the causes of refuge, those two, fear and confidence or faith. Fear of the lower rebirths in this case, though it can be fear at different levels. Fear of continuing to be in samsara, fear of others having to suffer when we get to the bodhicitta motivation. But essentially, it starts with our own situation, looking at the fear of what might happen after this life if we don't do the work that we're here to do. Then, secondly, that faith or confidence that knows that what we are placing our trust in terms of the three jewels is a reliable refuge, is a reliable source. Again, I use this phrase that Alex Berzin uses, safe direction, which I really kind of like because it's, again, we've been going it with like an unsafe direction. We keep kind of aiming in ways that are not really going to get us to what we are seeking. The happiness that we seek in terms of avoiding lower rebirths, but moreover, the ultimate happiness, the definite goodness of liberation and enlightenment. So this is topic we looked at, and then we introduced the three jewels briefly. Remember, there was that little chart. I'll be referring to it here and there. Let me go ahead and put it up on the screen. This one, yeah. It had the four different bodies or aspects of a Buddha's experience. We'll touch on those a little bit tonight, not a whole lot. Those were, again, just to kind of know that a Buddha's experience has a more personal side of it, which is these two truth bodies, Dharmakaya, and then has a more social, interpersonal dimension, which is where the Buddha appears in various forms to help sentient beings. And so these two aspects of the Buddha come together, what we call these four bodies of a Buddha, in being the ultimate Dharma jewel. The Buddha that we take refuge in at the ultimate level is the being who has attained this, who has attained both the, again, personal development, their own kind of self welfare, and then who has attained the ability to enact the welfare of others through these form bodies. On a conventional basis, we have any representation of the Buddha indicated here as the conventional Buddha jewel. We'll touch on that briefly when we get to the precepts of refuge, which we'll hopefully get into a bit tonight. But anything that represents the Buddha, a statue, a tanka painting, any image is essentially a conventional way of invoking the Buddha in our lives. For the Dharma jewel, the conventional is any text, what we might call the scriptural Dharma jewel, which are the writings that come from the teachings of the Buddha and so on, that, the texts that we're studying now. This is all part of the conventional Dharma jewel. But the ultimate Dharma jewel are the actual realizations, the true paths, which in this case are realizations of emptiness, though obviously they have other realizations are combined with that and prior to that and after that and so on. But what are called true paths are true direct realizations of emptiness that are unmistakable and will cause, in a sense, they're not quite caused phenomena, cessations, but nonetheless, they are part of the process of having a true cessation in our mind, meaning that a portion of what is obscuring our minds gets removed each time when we have those direct realizations of emptiness. So again, this is what we are at an ultimate level taking refuge in, are those realizations and the effect of those realizations, the cessations of the obscurations that occur with them. For the Sangha jewel, conventionally, it's a group of 4 fully ordained monks or nuns, and where those exist, we have sort of the conventional Sangha jewel. But really, anyone who's ordained, we can see to some degree as a representative of the Sangha jewel for us. But the ultimate Sangha jewel are those who are Aryas, who've had those true paths, those direct realizations of emptiness. They're superior beings. They've already begun the process of exiting samsara and moving towards at least liberation, if not full enlightenment. So again, those are the 3 jewels that we're talking about taking refuge in. So as I said, the main topic we're going to start with tonight is what are the reasons why we can have confidence in those 3 jewels? We can introduce them and talk about them, but we have to understand kind of what is entailed in making them a perfect refuge. So let me go ahead and begin with this section of the text where we look at these reasons why they are worthy to be a refuge. One who is worthy to be a refuge is, and there are 4 qualities here that are laid out. 1, free of all fear. If we have fear of the lower realms, fear of continuing to be in existence, fear of other suffering, well, we need someone who's free of those fears to actually help us, right? If someone is still bound by those fears, well, then they're not really a perfect refuge. The second thing, skilled in the means of liberating others from fear. That's the other quality, right? If they are free from that, but they don't have the ability to help us to become free from our fears and address our fears, well, then they wouldn't be a perfect refuge. They wouldn't be worthy in that role. The third one is steeped in great compassion toward everyone without closeness or distance. This is the mental attitude that a Buddha possesses. Great compassion is essentially the compassion that we normally have elevated to the level where we are dedicated to helping beings to be free from their suffering. We all have some level of compassion, right? We have compassion for loved ones, generally, pets, family members, what have you, and we even extend our compassion at times to other beings. A Buddha has great compassion all the time. And great compassion is that wish not just for beings to be free from their suffering, but to be the agent to help them to do that. And that's what guides a Buddha's actions. They have been practicing on the bodhisattva path, holding on to that mind of great compassion and deepening it so that in the ripened state of Buddhahood, that is where they act from, is a state of great compassion and great love for all beings. And they don't have any kind of blocks then in that regard. They have that for every being. It's complete. So that's their mental attitude. In terms of the actions they engage in, we see that there are no biases there either. The final of these 4 qualities there says, and they work for the welfare of all beings, whether they help the Buddha or not. So, you might have some who are very close to the Buddha. There's this example that's used sometimes where you'd have like 2 people on either side of the Buddha, like the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. And on one side, you have somebody who's lovingly, caringly massaging their arm with oil to make them feel good and whatever. And so you have this very loving person on this side. And on the other side, you have somebody who's hacking away at the Buddha's arm with some sort of machete or something. And the Buddha will not differentiate between these 2 and say, oh, you helped me, I'll help you. Oh, you have hurt me or, are doing things that are opposed to my well-being, I won't help you. The Buddha will engage in actions of helping others, regardless of what others do in relation to the Buddha. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that, we should just treat our teachers or holy objects or any of these things we're going to look at as part of our precepts in a disregardful way and, in a negligent way. We have to recognize that from our side, we can create karmic obstacles to receiving the benefit of the Buddha. But from the side of the Buddha, there's no discrimination. The Buddha will help beings regardless of what they have done and have that mind that wants to help them. Whether we can kind of receive that help and be in a place where we will actually benefit from that depends upon our own karmic situation. And that's one of the tricky things about this whole thing of refuge. That's why I mentioned last week Lama Yeshe saying we mean doing refuge much more than taking refuge. Taking refuge doesn't mean I'm going to put all my faith in some being out here who's going to take care of me and help me on the path regardless of what I do. It means I'm going to take that being as my guide and the teachings they give as my medicine, and I'm going to use them in my life so that I can accomplish what the medicine is intended to do. It means I have to do the work. It doesn't mean that the other being, the Buddha, does the work for me, because the Buddha is this developed, wonderful being that has all this compassion and love. That is what's happening from the side of the Buddha. But for me to benefit from that, I actually have to engage in, the activities of doing refuge, going for refuge, taking refuge, whatever terms we use. So that's the whole idea behind this, is that, again, from the side of the Buddha, these are the qualities that make the Buddha a perfect refuge, because they have this, again, lack of bias, great compassion for all beings, complete knowledge how to help them to address their fears, and complete freedom from fears themselves, a complete fearlessness. I have a little note on there. What is my note? I forgot what I put in there. Oh, I have that the fourth reason is worded somewhat differently in the great treatise. I think that the way that was worded had to do with kind of the degree to which a Buddha helps others, something. And it was the same at the intent, but just know that if you do look at that version, it isn't worded quite the same. Again, it's kind of interesting. In some places in the earlier great treatise, which, even though it's a larger volume, it was prior to this composition of middle-length Lamrim that Lama Tsongkhapa did shortly before his passing. But anyway, you will see some of these differences. I don't know that I need to actually, go to the passage and show you, but so then it goes on to say, as only the Buddha has those qualifications. Now, again, how do we know that? Well, I guess this is, again, something we might have to have some confidence in from our exposure to Buddha's teachings, that what we are talking about in terms of achieving that state is something that does require the level of effort that the Buddha had put in and attained that. But this is what Buddhism teaches, is that a Buddha is a being who is fully perfected, completely free of all obscurations, completely developed all the good qualities. So Ishvara, which is a worldly god, and the like, do not have those qualifications. Because the Buddha has them and they don't, he is a perfect refuge, or they, we might say, because there are many Buddhas. They kind of lack gender at the level of being a Buddha, because that Buddha appears in whatever form to benefit others. So that's kind of the logic behind the first of the three jewels. The Buddha jewel is perfect for these reasons. Secondly, for that reason, because of all the above, the Dharma taught by the Buddha, as well as the Sangha of his disciples, thirdly, are also worthy objects of refuge. Again, because of the Dharma are the perfect teachings that not only are coming out of the Buddha's mouth and being disseminated to all of us and so on, but they are also the exact teachings that the Buddha used to attain the state of Buddhahood. So essentially, they are the causes of a Buddha, and they are what will be the causes of our Buddhahood, coming from the Buddha's teachings and so on. So the Dharma jewel is reliable because the Buddha is reliable. Then therefore, the Sangha, again, the Arya beings in particular, those who have developed deeper realizations based on the Dharma that the Buddha taught, that will lead them in the same direction that the Buddha attained, of course, they're reliable as refuge objects too. So that's the logic that is set out to kind of indicate that we can have that great confidence. There are, these reasons why the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha then are reliable refuges for us. So then Tsongkhapa goes on to say, that being so, once you have derived certainty with regard to these objects of refuge that are set forth in the compendium, when you are able to rely on them with a single-pointed mind, It is impossible for you not to be protected. But again, this is, as he's pointing out here, it comes from us relying on them with a single-pointed mind, with a mind that is intent upon following the advice that the Buddha gave. I alluded a little while ago to the Dharma being medicine. This is actually an analogy that isn't in our text, but we hear it often, right? When we talk about these three jewels of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we can see the Buddha as a perfect doctor who's essentially telling us in the very first teaching that the Buddha gave that we're not well. Things are not good. we are in a state of samsara, of experiencing what the Buddha calls dukkha, which we'll look at in the next part of this second course in this middle length Lamrim study. And essentially, the Buddha is giving us then the medicine that will help us to achieve some cure from the malady that we are experiencing, the fact that we're under the control of our karma and delusions and thereby experience lower rebirths and thereby continue to be in samsara and thereby also continue to be unenlightened. So the Buddha is kind of diagnosing us perfectly and prescribing the exact medicine, which is the Dharma. Then thirdly, we have the Sangha, who are kind of the assistants, the people who can help us to take the medicine because they've taken the medicine themselves. They sometimes use the phrase nurses, but I like the idea of assistants, because nurses don't necessarily take the medicine. Nurses help us to take the medicine, but assistants, if we think about them in that way, they can assist us because they have taken the medicine. They do know, the wisdom of emptiness. They do know how to help us to the greatest degree. Again, if we rely upon those who are more ultimate Sangha jewels. Sangha, I know in our culture has gotten to be a pretty broad term, and we can talk about spiritual communities being Sangha. They use this term very easily and quite, widely in the Vipassana tradition. Here in Santa Fe, we have the Santa Fe Vipassana Sangha. And so Sangha can be used in a way to refer to kind of a spiritual community, but that doesn't mean everybody in that spiritual community is our refuge. There might be people in that spiritual community who have not attained these realizations, and we might learn from them and gain some knowledge from them, but it might not be perfect knowledge. The ultimate jewels that we want to rely upon are those three that I mentioned. Again, the various bodies of a Buddha, a fully enlightened being, for the Buddha jewel, the actual realizations, the true paths, and the cessations that they have caused, that are, again, in the mind of other beings, Buddhas and Sangha members. That's the Dharma jewel. And then the beings who have attained that, the Aryas who have at least attained a direct realization of emptiness, all the way up to Buddhas. So essentially you have beings that we can rely upon in a much more kind of deeper way when they do have those qualifications. But essentially, these are the doctor, the medicine, the assistants that can help us. And we are not well. We have to learn that things are not well with us and that we need their assistance in order to attain some freedom from our suffering, whether it be the lower rebirths, samsara in general, or again, the unenlightened state and inability to help others to be free from their suffering as well. The very bottom of the screen, therefore, you should generate certainty from the depths of your heart of the two causes for being protected. There is no incompleteness in the external one, our teacher having established it. So essentially, if the two causes for being protected, we can say are relating to some degree to the two causes we saw last week, kind of from our own side, generating some concern for our current situation and for our future situation. And then taking kind of having confidence and faith that the Buddha can protect us. Well, from the side of the three jewels that can protect us, there are no faults, right? There's no incompleteness. Our teacher has established refuge, has established a reliable source for us to follow in terms of our path. And then it says here to conclude this, however, since the internal cause, taking hold of that refuge trustingly, has not come about, we suffer. So, we have to develop a heartfelt kind of concern for our own situation. And then we turn towards the three jewels with some conviction, again, that they will protect us from that. So again, we could relate that to the two causes that are mentioned here. From our side, having kind of holding on to that refuge. From the side of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, having the ability to offer that. Or we could relate it back to the two refuge causes that we talked about last week. But essentially, we have to have these two coming together. Just like if you had, going back to the medical analogy, if you have a patient who comes in and the doctor says, okay, here's the medicine you need to take, and here are the other things I'm prescribing. You need to do this and do that, and blah, 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 blah. And then the patient has no confidence in that and doesn't want to follow that, is not convinced that that's, a reliable way to be cured of that illness. Well, then it's not going to work, right? You might have perfect advice from the side of the doctor, but if the patient isn't willing to kind of have some confidence, have some faith in that on the basis of their own wanting to relieve their situation, well, then it's not going to work. You need both sides of it. And it's a kind of a symbiotic relationship. We need the teachers, the doctors, and need to see ourselves as a patient that wants to follow that advice so we can actually attain what the Buddhas want us to attain. Okay, now we go on to a new topic. This is going to be a little bit deeper topic, goes into a number of things. The way in which you go for refuge. This has 4 points. Going for refuge by way of understanding their excellent qualities. So again, this could be like a whole class in and of itself, looking at the excellent qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. This will be the first topic we're going to examine. Secondly, by way of understanding the distinctions between the 3 jewels or among the 3 jewels. That we can say the Buddha is this, the Dharma is that, and the Sangha is something else. It's kind of like the way that I just delineated them in the medical analogy. And so we're going to look at those to some degree and also talk about some ways that we can make distinctions among these 3 jewels. Thirdly, by way of commitment, what is the level of commitment that we need to have that will really reinforce our refuge? And then fourthly, by way of not advocating other refuges and kind of admitting that, yes, there are lots of wonderful things out there, and I'm not denying their benefit and their maybe efficacy to some degree. But what does it mean to actually go for refuge in this way, to not advocate that others are refuges in the way that the 3 jewels are? First one, understanding their excellent qualities. I may not spend that much time on this, but it is important that we touch on this, and this is a big point to reflect on. Since this requires recollecting the excellent qualities of the objects of refuge, this has 3 points. The excellent qualities of the Buddha, the excellent qualities of the Dharma, and of course the excellent qualities of the Sangha. In regard to the excellent qualities of the Buddha, I have a little footnote there because it's to remind me, to let you know that if you do have that other translation of Babanka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, which was published as Liberation in Our Hands, slightly different title. In part 2, there's an appendix, Appendix E, which is called The Classifications of a Buddha's Body, Speech, and Mind. And it's really quite nice. This is one reason why I like that version. I like the translation at times too, but it has kind of these various points that are delineated. It doesn't go into the Buddha's activities so much there, but it goes into the qualities of the body, speech, and mind. And I may touch on a few examples from that as we go through this. But we are going to divide this point up into 4 subpoints, which are the qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, mind, and then the exalted activities, the holy activities of these enlightened beings. First, the Buddha's body. You may have heard this phrase before, the signs and marks, the 32 signs and the 80 minor marks of a Buddha. Again, they are laid out, as my footnote says there, in Liberation in Our Hands as part of that appendix. I'll read from that in a moment. But they give us here an example of some verses that are speaking to the various signs that occur on a Buddha's body. Now, what do we mean by appearing on a Buddha's body? We mean essentially 2 different manifestations of the Buddha that definitely have these. One is that complete enjoyment body. Let me get that back on the screen again, that little chart. The complete enjoyment body, as you might recall from last week, is the way in which a Buddha manifests their enlightened kind of presence in a pure land. And in that pure land, they are endowed with these 32 marks and 32 signs and 80 minor marks. And in that land, again, Arya Bodhisattvas can come and partake of their teachings and their presence. And there are other certainties in regard to this. I'm not going to go into great detail on this. But in that form, as a Sambhogakaya, the complete enjoyment body, you would have all of those marks and signs. As an emanation body, the only instances that are definite to have that are when you appear as a supreme emanation body. Remember, I think I mentioned last week that the Buddha himself was a supreme emanation body. I know we like to think of Shakyamuni Buddha as having attained enlightenment in that life, to actually have been born as an unenlightened being, Prince Siddhartha, and to have gone through everything we learn about the Buddha's life and then attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree at the age of 35 and gone on to teach the Dharma. All those things did happen, but in the Mahayana perspective, they were all the kind of 12 deeds that a supreme emanation body exhibits in a world system when they start the wheel of Dharma turning. And so it was more or less a show. I mean, in a good show for that, gave us the exact advice on how we can do all of that ourselves. But it wasn't that there was this unenlightened being named Prince Siddhartha who became enlightened in that life. This was a way for this manifestation of a Buddha to come into this world and begin the process of disseminating the Dharma for the benefit of all the beings who would be, again, in the kind of the wake of the Buddha's teachings as we are. So essentially, that form of a Buddha is said to be endowed with these marks and signs. Now, did everyone see them? They say no, again, depends upon the karma of those beings. But nonetheless, there were many who had that pure view of the Buddha and saw him in his fully enlightened form with all of these various signs and marks. Again, there are 32 signs, 80 marks. Let's take a look back at our text on some of the verses that are cited here from the praise and analogies that gives us an appreciation for at least a few of these. Your body is adorned with the signs, so beautiful, nectar for the eyes, like a cloudless sky in autumn, ornamented with clusters of stars. O sage, endowed with the color of gold, he is said to have a gold countenance through his whole body, so beautiful, dressed in monastic robes, like a golden mountaintop, wrapped in clouds at dusk or dawn. Protector, the sphere of your face's splendor, although unadorned by jewelry, is beyond that of the full moon in a vast and cloudless sky. In the lotus of your mouth, and a lotus in bloom, if the lotus of your mouth and a lotus in bloom in the sun, just an ordinary lotus we have in our world, are beheld by a bee, the bee will have its doubts about the ordinary lotus, will think that actually they would prefer the lotus of the mouth of a Buddha. Your face endowed with the color of gold is beautified further with your pure white teeth, like immaculate autumn moonbeams, filtering between golden mountains. Venerable one, your right hand embellished with the mark of the wheel. There's said to be a Dharma wheel that is on the mark, on the palm of the hands, not just the right hand, but both hands, I think is where it is. It gives breath to the people terrified. Gotta click there. Terrified by the cycle of samsaric existence. O sage, as you walk, your feet leave designs on the earth, like resplendent lotuses. Could Padmini be lovelier? You should recollect them in accordance with these verses. Now, these verses, again, are not that complete. They don't give all the various kind of signs and marks. The signs are usually presented, and as they're presented, again, this is what that book looks like that I was mentioning, Liberation in Our Hands, Volume 2. Again, I think they're still available from Mahayana Sutra and Tantra Press. I think each volume, I don't know, it was only like $15 when I got it some years ago. I don't know how much they are now, but these are all set out as well in the text that I studied in the master's program, Ornament for Clear Realizations, Abhisamaya Lamkara, Maitreya Buddha, sets all of these out and gives for the signs, the 32 signs, they're always presented with the causes that one generates on the path that produce those in the state of Buddhahood. You have to create everything through causes and conditions. So I'll just read the very first one, is the thousand-spoked wheel sign on the palms of the hands that was mentioned in our verse. Also, it's on the soles of the feet, and it's produced by accompanying one's gurus when they go out and by going out to greet them when they return, by praising the act of hearing the Dharma, and by honoring temples and stupas and the like. What's another one that would be good? Soft, youthful hands and feet are produced by giving excellent food and drink to others. A large straight body is produced by refraining from taking others' lives, and so on. So by doing all these various virtuous actions on the path as a bodhisattva, you create the causes to have them manifest in the resultant state of Buddhahood with your, again, Sambhogakaya, your complete enjoyment body, having all of those signs. And then when you appear as a supreme emanation body in a world system, then you would also be endowed with those signs. But essentially, This is kind of, again, set out in that regard. In terms of the marks, they are usually set out as the 80 marks, what they are, and secondly, what the inner qualities are that the Buddha has that are signified by them. So it's a little different. They too arise from their causes and conditions, but here the 80 minor marks are all related to inner qualities that the Buddha possesses. So for the very first one, a Buddha has copper-colored nails because he has completely abandoned attachment for all kind of produced phenomena. It says here composed entities, but we can think about all of the stuff in our world that we have great attachment for, right? All the delicious, delightful things that we enjoy. Well, the Buddha has completely abandoned the attachment for all of those, thereby has these copper-colored nails. I'm not sure I get the full correspondence of this, but these various things, again, do have an internal quality that they're related to. He has ankles that do not protrude because he has acquired knowledge of the well-hidden Dharma. He has, let's see, a lion-like gait because his skills surpass those of all other beings in the way that the lion is sort of the king of the jungle. The Buddha has that sort of ability to transcend everything that other beings have attained and so on. Let me pick out another one or so that would be. He has magnificent limbs because he has proclaimed the virtues of others. So again, you have all these various things that are there. I won't go through the entire list, but just know that these are well worth studying and taking a look at because they can be very inspiring and also give us some guidance on the sorts of activities that we need to be engaged in and the sorts of qualities we need to begin to form in ourselves. If we want to become just like the Buddha, well, you have to create the causes and conditions. And once you've created the causes and conditions, there's no stopping the result. It will come about when all those conditions are complete. So let's carry on then with looking at the Buddha's speech. The Buddha's speech is said to be really quite magnificent. Contemplate the marvelous way in which, when many people ask different questions at the same time, the Buddha apprehends them in a single moment of intelligent awareness and answers them all with one utterance, which they understand in their respective languages. That's one of these qualities of a Buddha's speech. My little note there says, if you see, whoops, I don't know what happened there. If you see there's again, a portion of that section of this book that I was just reading from, they go through what are called the 64 qualities, sometimes they're called melodious qualities of the Buddha's speech. Well, what are all of these? Let me read just a couple of these as well. You know, this idea that people will hear things in their own language, answers to their questions or whatever it is that they have, that they are hearing from the Buddha. This is an amazing quality of the Buddha through the omniscient mind of a Buddha and the ability through their great compassion and so on. They can exactly offer the speech that is needed by sentient beings in their language, according to their karma and so on. A Buddha's speech is smooth in that it makes the virtue roots of sentient beings firm, just as free-flowing water moistens grasses, plants, and trees, causing them to grow and flourish. Secondly, a Buddha's speech is soft in that it causes one to gain happiness in this very life. Thirdly, it's agreeable in that it conveys excellent meanings. Fourthly, it's pleasing in that it is well articulated. Fifthly, it is pure in that it leads to the attainment of both the transcendent qualities and the ultimate goal, and so on. And you have all these amazing qualities. Again, they're really quite inspiring to reflect on, to read about. 64 amazing qualities of the Buddha's speech. You know, it's kind of interesting. I mean, that is really the main way. The Buddha's presence in a physical body is obviously part of what benefits others, but it's really through the speech of a Buddha that we are able to receive the medicine, right? We need to have some way of conveyance of what the Buddha knows, the knowledge of a Buddha, into our minds so that we can then become like the Buddha. So the Buddha's speech is an important thing to reflect upon because it does have these amazing qualities that once more are part of making the Buddha a reliable guide for us because of the speech that will exactly come into our lives in the way that we need it to. Again, we have to create the causes from our side and our faith and confidence in the Buddha to do that. Anyway, there's a little bit more on the speech. It says here the Satyaka chapter says, thus, if all beings simultaneously ask many questions in their specific languages, the Buddha's mind comprehends them in a single moment and answers them all with one melodious statement. In this way, he who guides the world knowingly, or that the Buddha teaches with their melodious voice. again, melodious speech. This is a phrase that's sometimes used. The Buddha completely turns the wheel of Dharma that puts an end to the suffering of gods and men, human beings. And of course, to all beings, but those are the main beings that the Buddhas teach, right? Because they have existences where they can at least comprehend the Dharma. Gods may not be as conducive to learning the Dharma, but human beings can often will have the opportunity then to practice that in that existence as a human being, as we've seen previously. And it just says, reflect along the lines of these verses. So we can, again, this is a very abbreviated way of looking at these various qualities. There are much, much more detailed ways of examining them, such as in that book that I've read from. Excellent qualities of the Buddha's mind. This has 2 points. We can divide essentially the Buddha's mind into the 2 fruitions of the 2 aspects of the path. We often talk about wisdom and compassion or method, right? We frequently talk about those as being like the 2 wings of a bird. So this has 2 points, the excellent qualities of the Buddha's exalted knowing and the excellent qualities of the Buddha's loving kindness, which would include, compassion, all the other, very kind of method-like qualities that help the Buddha to be able to benefit other beings and so on. The Buddha has to have that perfect knowledge to be operating from, but needs that kind of perfect mind that wants to benefit others, that cares about others very deeply through great love and great compassion. So the first aspect, the wisdom aspect, the Buddha's exalted knowing. Since all objects of knowledge, both ultimate, which would be the emptiness of phenomena, all the various phenomena that exist have an emptiness, and the conventional, all those various phenomena that are conventional that do exist, are engaged by the sage's unobstructed exalted knowing, like Marobalan. Marobalan is called a cherry. It's also translated as a cherry plum. Apparently, it has kind of a transparent skin. That Marobalan fruit that's placed in the palm of the Buddha's hand you're able to see the inside of it through the transparency of the skin. So it's an analogy for the ability of the Buddha through their omniscient mind to cover all objects of knowledge, as it says here. The sage has that exalted knowing that knows all phenomena, past, present, and future. The Buddha has direct knowledge of all of that, no longer obstructed in any way, whereas we are quite obstructed. We can only know so many phenomena and there are a lot of things that are hidden to us, right? However, others' limited knowing cannot cover the vast extent of objects to be known. Regarding this, praise of the one worthy of praise says, only your wisdom encompasses all objects of knowledge. For everyone else apart from you, some objects are yet to be known. And, Blessed One, all phenomena throughout time, in every aspect and place of origin, are objects of experience of your mind, like a Marobalan fruit in the palm of your hand. As regards phenomena, static or mobile, single or various, each distinct individual, your mind is unobstructed from none of them, like the wind moving across the sky. And this wind moves across the sky, it's never obstructed, right? It just moves straight through the sky. So the Buddha's mind, regardless of what phenomenon we're talking about, whether it's a single one or a variety of things, whatever it is that can be known, that is an object of knowledge. Again, the object of knowledge is coexistent with existence. So anything that exists is an object of knowledge, is a phenomenon. And so the Buddha has complete direct knowledge of all of that. Reflect in accord with those words. Okay, so again, we can reflect. I think that in another presentation in the ornament, and that is also in here as well, they divide the wisdom mind of a Buddha into 21 different aspects. I won't go into any of those today, but you can parse up varieties of various things that the Buddha could know and what have you. But the Buddha has perfect knowledge, has complete omniscience. Then the other aspect of the Buddha's mind, that again is the method side of it, the Buddha's loving kindness, mercy, compassion. Sentient beings are bound by the afflictions without any control. Likewise, the Buddha is bound by great compassion without control, because great compassion continuously arises in the Buddha whenever the Buddha perceives suffering sentient beings. This is, again, why we practice this whole path of the Mahayana that is so dependent upon that method side, the great compassion, bodhicitta, great love, all of this, is because this is becoming stronger and more deeply rooted in our minds, so that when you manifest in Buddhahood, You don't even have to think thoughts of loving kindness and compassion. That's who you are. Again, a Buddha does not have thoughts. We talk about this great compassion of a Buddha here and just delineated it as loving kindness, compassion, what have you of a Buddha. It doesn't mean the Buddha says, I should generate some loving thoughts towards Dawn and towards Stephen and towards Linda and towards, Shayla and all. I mean, it does. The Buddha doesn't kind of have to make those conscious movements of the mind. The Buddha's mind is always in that place, always generating loving kindness and compassion for all beings, because of all the work done on the path of imbuing their minds with those thoughts that manifest in the state of enlightenment, with that intention always being present. And then, of course, the wisdom side of it is what allows them to actually enact that in terms of informs their ability to address the suffering of others, to teach others according to their karma and predispositions and so on. So these two come together. I mean, we often talk about kind of that starts with the conventional and ultimate in terms of the base. We have the two aspects of the path that we practice, the compassion method side and the wisdom side. And it results in Buddhahood in terms of the Dharmakaya, the fully awakened mind of a Buddha, that then can manifest in forms to benefit others according to this compassionate wish. So it all neatly is arranged in this sort of dualistic kind of thing, not meant to be purely dualistic, because these two are one essence when it comes to the Buddha. The Buddha can be thought of in terms of those two aspects, but the Buddha is a unitary phenomenon that simply has these qualities of perfect wisdom and perfect desire to benefit others in terms of the loving kindness and compassion. And they often speak to also the perfect ability to do that, because from the side of the Buddha, there's nothing stopping the Buddha from doing whatever will be a benefit. From the side of the sentient beings, it depends, right? Because as I was saying earlier, it's contingent upon our karma. Now, another text is cited here, Praise in 150 verses, says, every one of these sentient beings is equally bound by the afflictions. We often use this phrase. We're going to see this more when we get to the second part of this part of the Lamrim study. You have long been bound by compassion, this is speaking to the Buddha, to release them from their afflictions. Should I first prostrate to you or to that which causes you to stay in samsara so long, aware of its faults? In other words, to great compassion. This is why Buddhists stay active in the world, is because they are imbued with that compassion that is not going to leave sentient beings in samsara at all. I mean, they will never have that thought, right? Never, they don't have thoughts to begin with, but they will always operate from that place of wanting to benefit others to the greatest degree. Then the Satyaka chapter, again, that was quoted earlier, also says, when the Buddha observes all beings with minds constantly obscured by the darkness of ignorance, locked up in the prison of cyclic existence, great compassion is born in the holy sage. That's the only response that a Buddha has, is compassion. Again, we saw that earlier in that was one of the qualities that made the Buddha a reliable refuge, was the great compassion for all beings. So recollect the Buddha's loving kindness and compassion and so on, all these wonderful qualities in accordance with these statements. Now, the exalted qualities of the Buddha's excellent qualities of the Buddha's exalted activities. Again, in ornament, that's my little note here, there are 27 different activities, exalted activities of the Buddha that are explained. And they are essentially all these activities. I can actually show you a little chart that comes from the Master's Program studies where you can get an idea of what these look like. But they're kind of these different activities that help beings to be placed on these different levels of the path. First, to set them on the path, to get them, to enter into the path that will lead to liberation and enlightenment. Then the various activities that help them to progress through the path of accumulation, the first of the 5 paths, the path of preparation, the path of seeing, where one has that direct initial insight into emptiness. Then the path of meditation, where one continues to engage in repeated meditation on emptiness and removing more and more obstructions and so on, all the way up to the 27th one, which is setting them in non-abiding nirvana, Buddhahood, setting them in the result. So essentially, these are not something, again, you need to know for this course. It's just giving you an idea that we could talk about myriad activities of a Buddha, because a Buddha is doing things to help sentient beings wherever they are, getting them onto the path, getting them to have the assistance they need throughout the path. All of these activities are, noteworthy, and certainly, a part and parcel of what a Buddha does, a sort of Buddha's job description, if you will. A Buddha benefits all sentient beings through both the spontaneous and the uninterrupted exalted activities of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind. Insofar as a disciple is fit for guidance, it is impossible for the sage not to give that trainee what is excellent. As I would have alluded to a couple of times tonight. Insofar as a disciple is fit, sort of karmically fit for guidance, has created the causes from their side to benefit from a particular teaching or guidance, what have you, then it's impossible for the sage not to give that trainee what is excellent and to pull him or her out of trouble. Thus it is said that through the Buddha's actions, the Buddha definitely does everything that is necessary. Again, from the side of the Buddha, they often use this analogy of like the sun. The sun in the sky is always shining, right? But we only have the ability to receive the benefit of the rays of light of the Buddha and the warmth and so on if we are actually out in the sunlight. And there'll be some days when it's overcast and we have the obscuration of the clouds that don't allow us to experience the sun's rays. And then there'll be situations where we are in some sort of closed off area in a building, in a cave, wherever the sun rays cannot reach us. That's sort of the karma of beings who don't have the ability to benefit from the amazing loving kindness and compassion and guidance of the Buddhas. They still have it. The sun is still shining. It's still there. They just are in a position where they can't benefit from it. Whereas we want to, through our refuge, we're constantly putting ourselves in positions where we'll benefit from being in the amazing rays of the Buddha's wisdom and compassion and be able to, be benefited in that way. So that's the analogy that's often used, and it gives a good perspective on it. We have to create the causes from our side, which means karmically doing the things that will allow us to benefit from the presence of these three jewels. Then Geshe Potowa, who's one of the Kadampa Geshes, said this: if you reflect on the Buddha's qualities again and again, your conviction strengthens and your mind stream becomes purer, which gives rise to more blessings. Blessings are really the way that those beings are able to have their rays of light get through to us. So we create the conditions for those blessings to be received through our mind becoming pure, our conviction strengthening, and so on. When you have gained certain knowledge about this, you will go for refuge from the depths of your heart. This will be your heart practice, is to always take refuge in the three jewels, which means essentially to follow the Dharma that is taught by the Buddha. That's the actual refuge, as we're going to see. The Buddha is the ultimate refuge in that is the guide that we need to depend upon, but it's the medicine we need to take. It's the way that we actually affect a cure in our own minds is, through the Dharma jewel. Then it says, then if you merely train in the precepts, whatever you do will become a practice of the Buddha Dharma. And we're going to look at those precepts. Again, I don't know if we'll get to them all tonight, but hopefully we'll be able to start touching on them. We do not value the Buddha's exalted knowing, even as much as we value an accurate fortune teller. If an accurate fortune teller tells you, I know there will be no bad luck for you this year, you walk away happy and comfortable. If that person says, oh, this year there will be great misfortune, don't do this, don't do that, you will try hard to accomplish it. And if you do not accomplish it, you will think, oh, I did not accomplish what that fortune teller told me to do. And your mind will be anxious. On the other hand, if the Buddha says, do this and that, accomplish this and that, do you take it on? If you do not accomplish it, does your mind become anxious? To claim the teachings say that, but owing to present circumstances, I cannot do it right now, so I must do this instead, is to ignore the Buddha's advice and proceed on the basis of your own discernment. So he's really giving some pretty practical advice here. We do tend to put, maybe people read their horoscope, or they do tarot cards, or they do the I Ching, or they do all these various, I'm not saying don't do those things, but where is your ultimate refuge, really? Well, this is like when we have things that go on. It was interesting. Venerable Sarah Thresher, she was in Nepal, in Kathmandu, when the earthquake hit in April of 2015. And it was interesting. She wrote in her Facebook page, she said, I tried to ask people after the earthquake, like after an hour or so, what was your first thought when you first felt the earthquake? I mean, where was your refuge? I mean, it's not to say that we don't find kind of temporary refuges. That is a part of our lives as well. If you're out or you're in a place where buildings are going to fall on you, maybe it's good to find a place where you can be protected from that. Door jams or whatever, where there's, some ability to hopefully survive one of those sorts of toppling buildings or what have you. But at the same time, what is in your heart? Is there attachment and craving and grasping in your heart? Or is there some trust and confidence in the three jewels and in what you've done in this life, that even if death comes, you have no fear? And so it's again, one way of testing it when we have those sorts of moments, when we are experiencing potentially some other difficulties in our lives. Where is our real refuge? And in our daily life, are we putting more faith in our horoscopes and all these other things versus really, what do I need to do to practice the Dharma now? What is it I need to do with my day so that I'm making good use of this day, furthering my progress towards the goals that the Buddha taught, at least a good rebirth, as we're, studying in this section. So I find that one kind of interesting. And I know people who use these sorts of prophecy kind of devices and whatever to tell what should happen or what they want to happen, and rather than follow it meticulously. But are you following the Buddha's advice meticulously? Are you really following everything the Buddha set out? Which is what we're going to move to in the next topic of karma. That's the main teaching we need to rely upon, especially to get a good rebirth. So just as Potoa says here, if we turn our mind inward and examine carefully, we will recognize that it is so true that our normal attitude, one of trusting others' mere words and being content without discernment, is nothing but delusion. Your real refuge is the three jewels, especially the Dharma refuge, the Dharma jewel. So then the kind of summary of this, therefore, think about the Buddha's excellent qualities, again, body, speech, mind, activities, again and again, and try to gain as much certainty as possible. Once that develops, you will have arrived at the main point of going for refuge. Then, for a similar certainty with regard to the Dharma jewel, well, that will arise concerning the Dharma jewel, that those are the teachings received from the Buddha. If the Buddha gave those teachings, well, then we have again a similar conviction. And from the Sangha, of those accomplishing that Dharma. So we have, again, this certainty that we gain by virtue of gaining certainty in the Buddha having these amazing qualities, like the qualities that we recited in that verse at the beginning of tonight, that praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. And then we can have similar confidence in the Dharma that was received from the Buddha, and that, as I said earlier, is the cause of the Buddha, and also the Sangha who have accomplished that Dharma. There's no way that going for refuge or taming the mind, let alone other paths, will occur without it. If you don't have this refuge, this confidence and placing your mind in the Dharma, there's no way that we can accomplish any of these results. To reflect on the excellent, how did I do that? I don't know how I got that up here. Let me stop sharing. I'm not sure what you're seeing, so let me stop it and I'll start it again. The excellent qualities of the, I went somewhere else. Okay, there we go. Excellent qualities of the Dharma jewel. Out of respect for the Buddha, you should recollect as follows. The Buddha's limitless excellent qualities arose from his meditating on and actualizing the Dharma of scriptures and realization, true cessations and true paths, as I mentioned earlier tonight. The epitome of the elimination of faults and the achievement of excellent qualities, as I mentioned as well last week. That's what we mean by a Buddha. Sang, completely eliminating faults, imperfections, and impurities. And Ye, completely achieving all excellent qualities, cultivating those to the greatest degree. So again, that's the intention of the way that the three jewels are set out in the compendium of the Teaching Sutra, which is kind of one of the sources for looking at these three jewels. The third jewel, the excellent qualities of the Sangha. This refers mainly to persons who are Aryas. As I said earlier tonight, those are the ultimate Sangha jewel. Recollecting the excellent qualities of the Dharma, you are mindful of those who accomplish it correctly, who have attained those deeper realizations. Again, an Arya is a being who's had at least one direct realization of emptiness. A non-conceptual awareness that is knowing emptiness in a way that begins the process of a cessation of the obscurations. And again, that's the intention of that same sutra in terms of how the three jewels are set out. That's going for refuge by way of qualities, knowing the excellent qualities and so on of the three jewels. Now we go for, looking at the second topic, going for refuge by way of understanding their distinctions. As is apparent from the compendium of ascertainments, you go for refuge aware of the distinctions among the three jewels. Well, in our text, we don't have those distinctions delineated, but I have put together previously a little chart that I have put out in your charts and other handouts folder on the Google Drive. And for details on this way of going for refuge, you can see that chart where there are 6 types of distinctions that are set out. And you will find more on them in Liberation in Our Hands and so on, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. Let me go ahead and give you a snapshot of that chart. We're not going to go into everything on it because, again, that's why this is a shorter version of the Lamrim, is because it's not going into detail on all these various things. But I've put this together primarily from Pabanka Rinpoche's text and a variety of other Lamrim texts. But there are, again, 6 different ways that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha can be distinguished or have differences between them. The different characteristics, different good works, different regard, different practices that we do in relation to the three jewels, different recollection in terms of how we recollect each of them, different merit that we create in relation to them. So again, you can go to any one of these columns, and I'm not going to, again, maybe I'll do one just to give you an idea, but essentially these are giving us some idea of the distinctions that we can find among these three jewels. So let's look at different characteristics. A Buddha has the characteristic of being enlightened, completely purified, and fully realized. Those 2 aspects that we referred to, Sangye. The Dharma has the characteristic of being the result of the Buddha's enlightenment, what the Buddha taught to others after his enlightenment. The Sangha has the characteristic of being the practitioners of that Dharma, those who prove the validity and the usefulness of what the Buddha taught. So again, each of these you can go into. I won't spend more time looking at them. That chart is out there, and it's a nice way to reflect on these various distinctions. So you gain an appreciation for the various qualities. And as I said, you can look in these other texts if you want more information on that. That is a topic, again, that's taught in the Lamrim Chenmo and other texts, but not taught in the middle length Lamrim, other than this very brief way. The third way, going for refuge by way of commitment, as is apparent from the commentary on the Vinaya Sutra, you go for refuge in terms of considering the Buddha to be the one who teaches the refuge. That's your kind of the commitment that you feel towards the Buddha, is that's the one who teaches the refuge, who actually allows you to have access to what will protect you from suffering and help you to attain the results you seek. The Dharma to be nirvana, which is the actual refuge. And of course, the nirvana is in the category of true cessation and true paths. It's a mental realization of the scriptural Dharma. For us, in the way that we are approaching the Dharma, we need the scriptural Dharma as the basis to eventually attain nirvana. But that's our actual refuge, to attain the nirvana that is self-liberation, but moreover, what was referred to earlier as non-abiding nirvana. I didn't explain it at that time. Some of you have heard this term probably when we talk about these 2 types of nirvana. Sometimes they give like 4 different categories of nirvana, but these are the 2 main ones. When we just use the word nirvana, we're often referring to the goal of those who want to achieve their own liberation. They attain this peace, this state of mind where they have removed all the afflictions, everything that is in that category, so that they no longer are creating contaminated karma. They have no ignorance, no attachment, no anger, and so on. And that state of peace is a state that they can have in a more ultimate way, but it's not the final result. The final result is non-abiding nirvana. Non-abiding nirvana is Buddhahood, where you're not abiding in the solitary peace of just plain nirvana. When they say when beings who attain that nirvana, these are the hearers and solitary realizers, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, we hear those phrases sometimes. They're the practitioners that are aiming for their own liberation. When they attain that, they check out of this life in which they attained it, and they abide in this state of peace, what we call sort of a solitary peace. And Buddha has to essentially disturb them out of that, bring them out of that so that they can complete the path. And so that's not the final result. It is an ultimate result in that it is unchanging. You will always have that state of nirvana in your continuum. But there is the state of non-abiding nirvana that's beyond that, where you're not abiding in that solitary peace, but of course you're also not abiding in samsara in the way that you were before, or the way that even those who have attained their own liberation were before. So you're kind of free of these two extremes of nirvana and samsara. You're not abiding in either one of them. You are abiding in Buddhahood, a state where you can continue to be involved in the world, not have solitary peace, and you're no longer dealing with any of the fears that other beings in samsara have because you're free of all of that. So essentially, this is what we mean by non-abiding nirvana. Neither of those two. You're not in solitary peace, nor are you in cyclic existence any longer. Therefore, because of your great compassion and great love, you can benefit all beings. And that's the final goal. That's what we're really aiming for. So again, nirvana here can refer to both to some degree, the nirvana that is one's own individual freedom from the afflictive obscurations, as well as Buddhahood, where you're free from not just the afflictive obscurations, but also the knowledge obscurations that keep you from having an omniscient mind that we spoke to just a short while ago. Then thirdly, in terms of refuge, in terms of commitment, do you think of the Sangha to be the companions who help you accomplish the refuge? So this is, again, a bit like the analogies that we've seen of doctor, medicine, assistants, what have you, especially with regard to the first and third one. The Dharma itself, we start off again with it. We need the scriptural Dharma. We need that kind of taking in those teachings. But the goal, of course, is to eventually accomplish, again, not just individual liberation, nirvana, but non-abiding nirvana, Buddhahood. The final of these four ways of going for refuge is going for refuge by way of not advocating other refuges. Having understood the superiority and inferiority of Buddhist and non-Buddhist teachers, teachings, and students, respectively, this is from the vantage point of Buddhism. When it says, inferiority of non-Buddhist stuff and what have you, we're not saying that there's no benefit to any of these things, other traditions. We're saying that from a Buddhist perspective, they are inferior. They don't get you to the result that Buddhahood does. And sometimes people think that all these spiritual paths lead to the same result. They don't. Buddhism leads to a very specific result. Mahayana Buddhism leads to attaining the state of a Buddha, and that is clearly delineated in the ways that we've been looking at. So you consider the three jewels alone then to be a refuge, and you do not consider teachers and so forth who are incompatible with them to be a refuge. So the idea here is that it's not that we're once more kind of downgrading and even in some way despising teachings from other traditions. We're simply looking at them and saying, do they do what Buddhism does? Are they going to give us the results that we are seeking? If we are intent upon achieving the results that the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha can help us to attain, well, then we put our money there. We put all of our confidence there. But we're going to go back to the text in a moment, but as is said there, it doesn't mean that on a temporal basis, you don't rely on other things. And certainly if you see teachings in other traditions that are consistent with what you are practicing in Buddhism, most of you know I grew up Catholic, and when I go back to some of the teachings of Jesus Christ, there are wonderful passages in there that I can say, oh, that's very Buddhist. And he said, love your enemies. Well, that's very profound, right? I'm not sure I ever got the instruction on how to do that in my Catholic upbringing, but in Buddhism, we practice loving our enemies, right? We practice engaging in, changing our minds of hatred and animosity towards our enemies into minds of loving kindness and compassion. So again, when we see other teachings, it doesn't mean we can't we don't just completely neglect them and despise them and throw them away or something. It means that we see that if they are conducive and help us to achieve the result that we seek, that's fine. And if it's even some temporal refuge that we need to have, that's fine. But where is your ultimate refuge, as I was saying earlier? As for the difference between the two sets, the difference between the teachers is that the Buddha has eliminated all faults and has completed the excellent qualities, while other teachers are the opposite to that. So we see that, again, there's a difference in the qualities of these beings. And so we take refuge in the ones that embody the qualities that we want to attain, the perfect Buddha jewel. Praise of the Exalted One says, having abandoned the other teachers, Blessed One, I go to you for refuge. If they ask me why, it is because you have excellent qualities and no faults. And another verse, the more I think about the other non-Buddhist textual traditions, the more my faith in you, protector, develops in my mind. That can be one thing we can gain when we look at other teachings. It's not that we, again, are trying discriminate against them in any way, but we see them as maybe a way of pointing out to us the value that we have in the tradition that we are practicing. We see the benefits of it, teachings that lead us to the result of Buddhahood. It's, again, a very different result than other spiritual traditions. Then another verse, their mental states are ruined by faulty tenets of those who lack omniscience. With ruined thinking, they do not see the faultless teachers, not even you. So again, we're going to see more about this idea of not having refuge in some other object later when we look at the precepts, and that's where we'll discuss a bit of what I shared there. But the idea is that this is a way that we should be going for refuge, is by disavowing a sense of ultimate refuge in something else. Again, I don't want to deny the benefit of people who feel like, okay, I want to practice my Christianity and my Buddhism and this and that and make it all just one big happy practice. I think there's some people that maybe that's their predisposition, is to feel like they're going to draw a little. There was even one gentleman here in Santa Fe who I met fairly soon after I moved here. And he had a radio show and then eventually a cable network TV show. And I was on there a couple of times, but he had this organization called Church of the One God. And on his business card, he had all these different religious symbols. And his whole philosophy was, I don't want to pin myself down to just one tradition. I want to embrace them all and see the value and benefit of all these. It's a nice thought. But the problem is that do you get to the goal of any one of them if you practice in that way? And that would be the concern that I think we're looking at here. If you don't commit kind of fully to the Buddhist path in terms of disavowing a sense of ultimate refuge in regard to other traditions, you probably won't see Buddhism taking you to the goals that Buddhism offers. It's just, you're going to spend a lot of time engaging in a lot of other activities that may or may not be conducive to your Buddhist practice. So I'm not, again, it's not these teachings, and even when we get into the precepts, are not meant to be discriminatory in any ways. They're simply looking at it from the point of view of practicality. If you're really going to engage in this and take it to its goal, well, then you need to be fully dedicated to that one path and to really seeing the primacy of that one path in your own mind. And makes sense. It's just, again, a very logical, practical approach to it. Now we get into the specific precepts, which I won't have much time to go into tonight. We're running close to the end of this. And I think actually, I'm not sure if I left, I may have a slide, a couple of slides that I wanted to show at some point that I didn't do. I don't have many slides for tonight because I just didn't have that much additional material. Oh, this is on precepts. Okay, so I don't need to do that. It's all on precepts. Okay, let's go to the precepts. When you take refuge, I might talk a little bit before I show you these precepts. When you take refuge, refuge is in your own mind, in your own heart. Refuge is words you say sometimes in a ceremony, and there are public ceremonies or even a private one you might have with a teacher who can bestow refuge. But the idea is you go into a ceremony and do this sort of thing. But saying the words is not refuge, it's what you have in your heart. And you can do that without the ceremony. The ceremony is an opportunity to make that much more formal. And many of you I know have gone through the ceremony of taking refuge formally. There are a number of people in our organization who are authorized to do that. I'm not one of them, just so you know, but Venerable Rabina does this, Geshe Sherab, who those two I know, and many other monastics and geshes and what have the ability to confer refuge. It's a whole ceremony where you do repeat various phrases that are attesting to your refuge in the three jewels. Oftentimes, as part of that, you have the ability to take the lay vows, anywhere up from 1 to 5 of the lay vows, depending upon how they're offered by that preceptor. But essentially, this is a formal way of doing that. But keep in mind, as I was saying, that really refuge is something you do in your heart and in your activities. And when you get to a point in your life where you say, this is it, this is my direction, I know this is a safe direction for me going forward, and this is the path I want to follow. Well, then in a sense, you have taken refuge in a formal way, even without the ceremony. So when you do that, there are commitments that are implied with doing that. And the commitments are not quite as strong as vows, though they're meant to be taken quite seriously. And we'll talk about at the end, we won't get to this week. Next week, we'll talk about how do you actually break your refuge commitments in a sense. And it's very difficult in some ways to do it, but it can be done. But we do have to abide by these activities. These are how we strengthen and produce kind of the energy of refuge in our hearts and minds so that we move forward in the proper direction. So there are, again, this is this topic that we're going into now, the last topic of this, the stages of training after having gone for refuge. After you've done this, what does it look like? I might mention here the little footnote that I have, which is in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise. In that first volume, and I've got the pages there, there are two different presentations of the precepts of refuge. How they appear in the Compendium of Determinations, that's a text by a Sangha, and how they appear in the oral tradition, which is actually what the middle length Lamrim presents. It doesn't present the other version. So just know that there are two different presentations of this. It does seem that in the oral tradition, this is how they are generally practiced. So even though you can go and look at what a Sangha said, don't think that those are the ones that you necessarily have to follow. They're certainly good advice, and some of them do repeat a few of the things in this. But this is the general way that refuge is given, and when it's given in our tradition, and particularly in the FPMT, these are the precepts that you need to abide by. They are divided into two groups of 6. The specific refuge precepts that are relating to the individual objects of refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then the common precepts that are relating to all 3 objects of refuge. Now, within this first category of 6, there are 3 precepts that have to do with what you have to stop doing, what are often called proscriptive, I think is the right term. These are behaviors that you need to stop engaging in. Then there are prescriptive precepts regarding what is to be accomplished, things that the refuge commitment entails doing. And some of them do involve some avoiding of things, but nonetheless, there's an intention behind those avoiding that enforce a positive thing, something that you want to accomplish. So let's see if we have time. We can go through at least these precepts regarding what is to be stopped. The Great Final Nirvana Sutra says, one who goes to the 3 for refuge is one who correctly attends to virtue. Such a one will never go for refuge to some other gods. Well, how do I get to this? This isn't the right thing. Is it? Oh, no, this is it. Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's it. Yeah, it's giving a summary of the 3. I thought we had gone on to the first one, but we hadn't yet. It's mentioned there, but essentially, you don't go to refuge to, again, other gods, other beings who are taught as a source of refuge to protect you. One who goes to the Dharma for refuge is free from a mind to harm or kill. That's the second in relation to the Dharma. You want to avoid harm to any being. This is that fundamental principle of Buddhism. In the Sanskrit, it's ahimsa, non-harmfulness, not harming others. Then one who goes to the Sangha for refuge does not mingle with the Tirthikas. In other words, you don't hang out with people who have wrong view, especially when that view is antithetical to Buddhism, when it's actually even perhaps harmful to Buddhism, beings who disparage Buddhism and so on. So in accordance with this statement, there are 3 precepts: to not go for refuge to other gods, other taught sources of refuge. That's after you've gone to refuge to the Buddha, to not consider those other beings in the same category. Then secondly, to abandon causing harm or injury to sentient beings, having gone to refuge in the Dharma. And then to not associate with non-Buddhists. Because again, we need a Sangha that supports us in our practice, not one that is antagonistic to our practice. Not to go to refuge to other gods. If one does not even regard worldly gods, mundane gods, Rudra, Vishnu, and the like, as long-term refuge, there is no need to mention Nagas, these kind of serpent-like beings, and the local spirits who end up as part of the category of hungry ghosts. They're mundane beings just like ourselves, just in a hungry ghost realm. Yet, although one should not rely on them owing to a lack of conviction in the 3 objects of refuge, it is not inappropriate to seek their assistance for some beneficial temporary objective. This is what I was mentioning earlier. There is, some ability to rely upon them if we need something in a more temporal way from them, but they're not our ultimate refuge. these mundane gods, beings who are taught in the Vedic traditions and other traditions and so on, are not in the same category as the Buddha from a Buddhist perspective. Again, someone who has that conviction in the creator God taught in the Judeo-Christian tradition would have a very different perspective. This is from a Buddhist perspective. It is analogous to seeking help from a benefactor for financial support or to relying on a doctor for treating an illness, right? You can do those things. Don't think because you have refuge in the Buddha, you can't take refuge in your doctor on a temporal basis to give you the medicine to relieve an ailment that you're going through. Don't wait for, the Buddha to show up at your door with that medicine. You need to rely upon temporal things occasionally. Where is your deeper refuge, though? Not in those mundane beings. Then the one in relation to the Dharma, to abandon causing harm or injury to sentient beings. The second consists in abandoning causing harm or injury to humans, animals, and so forth through thought or actions like beating them, binding them, ensnaring them, piercing their noses, burdening them unbearably. I tend to be talking mainly about animals there, but we can obviously harm humans, animals, beings, sentient beings in our world, and we want to abandon that. Not to associate with non-Buddhists. The third consists in not coming under the influence of those who are not convinced that the three jewels are refuges and who denigrate them. This is an important aspect of it again. It doesn't mean you can't have friends from other spiritual traditions. I do interfaith work here in Santa Fe, and every week I get together with interfaith friends and have tea, coffee, and discuss things that are going on in our world and what have you. And it's very insightful, and I love being in the presence of other beings who feel some sense of refuge or commitment to their own spiritual tradition. But none of them are antagonistic to Buddhism. None of them disparage Buddhism, and they're quite respectful of my beliefs and what have you. Perfectly fine in those environments to be with those beings. And, due to the strength of your refuge, you're not swayed by the things that they're sharing about their spiritual tradition because you honor it and respect it, but it's not your path. But essentially, to put yourself in a place where you're going to be influenced by those individuals can be dangerous for people who don't have a really deep sense of commitment and conviction in the Buddhist teachings. So be careful, especially if you're, kind of new on the path and new on all of this. But most of you, I think, have been around long enough to have that kind of strength of your own practice to not be swayed so easily into various other things. So those are the three that pertain, again, to the three jewels specifically in regard to what you shouldn't do. Those are the three things you shouldn't. I haven't had time to go into the three you should, and we'll talk about those next week and start there. And then we'll go on to finish off the precepts and go to karma, the next big topic. So any questions or comments before we do our discussion group in the Zoom room or here in the Gompa? I don't think there's anything in the chat box. Anyone? No? Let me put on the screen the questions. You have two quizzes again, or I'm sorry, two homeworks. You have homework from last week because we didn't finish off the first part of the three jewels. We did that tonight. And then you have a little bit of tonight that you can work with. We went through the first one last week, so you don't need to do that one, two causes, so you can review them if you wish. This is where we started tonight, number 2. What are the reasons why the three jewels are worthy to be a refuge? And then please identify and briefly explain the 4 excellent qualities of the Buddha. This isn't to go into all the detail of the 32 signs and 80 marks and all that. It's just briefly explaining what are the 4 qualities and what are they basically referring to. That's essentially what I want you to discuss. And as you go through this, don't just limit it to facts. I mean, you can talk about how does that reflecting on those excellent qualities inspire you? What is it about them that really does help you to have deeper conviction in the three jewels as a reliable refuge? Then let's go to the other quiz or homework, which was homework for session 4, tonight's session, where I did go through a little bit of this. Well, actually, just probably a little bit of the first part. The first question is, what are the 6 specific refuge precepts related to the individual objects of refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha? We only went through the first 3. So you can review those and maybe talk about them again, about how following them strengthens your refuge. Don't just identify them. I mean, I know the question doesn't go into that, but as we discuss this, it really is important that we kind of make these practical in our own lives. Why do we follow those precepts? Is it just, oh, the Buddha said so, therefore I follow it? No, there's a logic. There's rationale behind all of it. So, and then we'll finish off this next week with the other two questions. So any questions about the questions? All right. Those of you who have to leave us at this time, be sure to dedicate all this positive energy you've created to enlightenment for all beings and His Holiness, all those wonderful things. And those of you who can stay on, take just a couple minutes to take a stretch break, whatever you need to do, and come back in. And Shayla will do her magic and make us all in breakout groups. And so maybe I'll join one of the groups tonight. I think Dawn, you're staying on, and Stephen, you two can maybe do a little discussion, the two of you. So, okay, so I'll see some of you in the Zoom room shortly. All right, thanks so much. Let's just do a check-in. I know how things went with the folks online. We had the one group that we were all part of, but in the Gompa, anything? But there's certainly, yeah, if there are other questions or concerns came out of the those on Zoom, please. Anyone?
Yeah, one more clarifying question again, Don.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Aphasia?
Can you hear me? Is exalted knowing the same as omniscience?
Wait, I'm not hearing you so well. Let's try again.
It's probably my Wi-Fi. Is exalted knowing the same as omniscience?
Yeah. Oh, exalted knowing. It's, I guess you could say it's the omniscience. Maybe omniscience. I mean, when we talk about the exalting, kind of the knowledge or wisdom aspect of a Buddha's mind, I suppose that we're referring to that. But then when you kind of unite it with the loving kindness and the compassion, is that part of the omniscient mind or not? I don't know. I mean, I think it gets to be hard to delineate them that much, put an entire line between those two then. So exalted knowing is certainly referring more to the wisdom aspect, the ability for a Buddha to have that perfect knowledge of all phenomena. That is, of course, united with the other mental aspect, the compassion and loving kindness, that then allows that to be instrumental in the world. So I'd have to kind of see whether it's described that as that. I don't even know if back in our text, if it was specifically referred to as omniscience there. I don't recall that it was. But it is essentially, that's where what we mean by omniscience is the perfect knowledge of all phenomena. So it would be included in there, but I just have a hard time saying, well, then does that mean that it excludes the method side of it? And I don't know that that's necessarily so either. I don't know. I mean, when we talk about the perfection of wisdom, I don't know, but I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let me think about it. Get back to you.
Thank you.
Because yeah, that exalted knowledge, that portion of a Buddha's mind, I don't know if it's exclusively omniscience, and then that would mean the other qualities would be something else. I don't know. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I'll make note of that for you, Aphasia. Yeah. Anything in the Gompa? Did you all have anything you wanted to share? Okay. Good discussion. Well, I think again, what I was encouraging you to do tonight with looking at this is to think about, yeah, I mean, what do these mean then? We can rattle off the facts, but what are we really talking about? One thing we got into in the group, which in the Zoom group, which I just should bring up is, again, sometimes this is a little bit circular in the Lamrim. I mean, we're learning about having this faith and confidence in the Buddha and seeing the reasons for the Buddha being a reliable refuge when we haven't even studied all the things that make a Buddha reliable refuge in terms of abandoning all of the obscurations and everything else. I mean, those are all things that we will learn about as we go through the course. So obviously, most of you have been around the Dharma and you know all these things, so it's not really as big an impact. But certainly if you're coming into the Lamrim from the beginning, it's hard to gain confidence in some of these teachings when you haven't even had the teachings yet. So it's a little, yeah, kind of circular or preemptive or something. I don't know what the right word is, but so we just kind of keep working with them. And of course, the Lamrim is meant to be gone through again and again and again. I remember there was one monk who was at one of the Light of the Path retreats with Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And he had read through the entire great treatise, the 3 volumes, I don't know, numerous times. I was just amazed that he'd actually been able, because I don't think I've even gotten through the entire 3rd volume. I mean, the 3rd volume is the tough one. That's the calm abiding and special insight, and so it's really quite complex in parts. And I just have never had the time to really sit down and digest the entire book. But so that's admirable, but that's what we need to be doing. I mean, that's not just reading it, obviously, meditating on it, studying it, and making sure that we integrate it into our minds. But that's the nature of the Lamrim. Right from the beginning, we're talking about topics that haven't even been introduced yet, like rebirth and what have you, that we gain more conviction in later, or karma. So let's go ahead and wrap things up. Let me share the prayers, and we can do those dedication prayers and conclude tonight. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And for His Holiness, as well as all of our other precious lamas who are still with us, all these spiritual guides that we have confidence in, men and women appearing in this form to help us to, be benefited by their teachings, their guidance. We make strong prayers for them to have good health and long lives, and for all their holy wishes to be fulfilled. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then we're continually making energy for the unmistaken reincarnation of Lama Zopa Rinpoche to be identified, and for everything to be auspicious for that being to be of incredible benefit in our world. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Let's do our usual dedication for the beings we're holding in our hearts right now, whether they be individuals that we know who have obstacles to their well-being, who are dealing with illness, who are perhaps dying, or who have died recently, or whether it be parts of the world where there's great suffering and strife due to man-made wars and what have you, conflict, or whether it be due to the elements. Those dying of famine, those dying of disease, particularly in Congo and other parts of Africa, where again the Ebola virus is raging right now. All these beings that we're thinking about where there's great suffering, may that suffering be quelled immediately for all of these beings we're bringing to mind. And may they have all the causes that lead them to true happiness and complete enlightenment. And may this be so for all beings through what we have done here together tonight. Okay, thank you all for joining again tonight, and have a good week. Again, try to do some meditation on this topic. There are the guided meditations that I've set out there, and other ways just to reflect on these points. And we'll continue with the topic of refuge next week. So thanks so much.
Thank
Be well.
you.
Okay,
Thank you.
very welcome. Thank you all so much. Let me go ahead and get the recording stopped here. Okay.